My guest today is Jamil Dhanani. Jamil, of course, is the founder of Gamma, which is the open marketplace for Bitcoin NFTs, essentially. Now, Jamil has been on the show before, so I suppose it is a case of welcome back to the show, Jamil.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on again, Andy.
It is a pleasure. And I guess it's fair to say that a lot has happened in, I don't know, it's probably been a year or so since you were last on the show. So last time around, we talked about Gamma as, I suppose, the leading marketplace for what was then just an emerging stacks ecosystem of NFTs on Bitcoin. Since then, a lot of course has happened. So Bitcoin Ordinals, which we'll talk about today. Before we all do that, though, Jamel, just for the benefit of new listeners, or let's just refresh everyone's mind, be great if you could just introduce yourself again and share a little bit of your personal story in the lead up to founding or co-founding Gamma.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I'm Jamil, the founder of Gamma, which was initially known as STX NFT about a year and a half ago. Before then, I worked primarily in actually AI and ML. So that's what I'd spend most of my career doing, from my undergrad to grad school to my time working on basically embedded hardware ML projects. So like on the AirPods and Apple Watch and similar devices like that. But just as is a pretty common story in tech, my evenings, weekends, side projects were always crypto related. So first, learning Solidity in the Ethereum ecosystem, and then getting into programmable Bitcoin around 2021, which was nice. That was like kind of a coming back home. Bitcoin was my first introduction to basically cryptocurrencies, and just knowing that people were continuing to work on developing the Bitcoin ecosystem for both fungible and non-fungible assets was extraordinarily exciting. And it's been phenomenal to watch a lot of the momentum over the past 2 months sort of reignite the fire under Bitcoin, so to speak.
Yeah, that's very much the case, Jamel. So again, then just share a little bit of the origin story then for Gamma, and just briefly kind of tell us how Gamma was founded, what it was originally, and then kind of bring us up to speed as to where Gamma is now, and then we can delve into the wonderful world of Bitcoin ordinals.
Yeah, so when Gamma was founded, it was around mid to late 2021, so around September 2021. And around then, you saw a lot of excitement around non-fungible assets, especially around, in Ethereum. The Bored Ape Yacht Club mint had just been completed around in April. CryptoPunks were getting really hot again. The floor price was rising, and you saw a lot of momentum around these projects on Ethereum, and then around the same time, Solana as well. But what you didn't see is a lot of momentum around Bitcoin and a lot of narrative around Bitcoin. Now, I thought this was kind of a shame because I honestly think Bitcoin has the, most secure, strongest, most decentralized platform for fungible assets. And you see that play out in the markets. You see Goldman Sachs, Exxon, like all of these traditional institutions start to come to Bitcoin and see Bitcoin as a strong store of value. And so I felt that there was a disproportionate lack of attention on Bitcoin relative to other blockchains and other assets, and not much was being worked on there. For example, there wasn't even a way on, let's say, one of the Bitcoin L2s, like Stacks, to view which NFTs you owned. And so this was the first thing that really the company came up with, which was a way to basically put in your Stacks or Bitcoin address and see which NFTs you own. And then eventually we started building creator tools and the marketplace, but all with this goal of building the best tooling we can for NFTs on Bitcoin. Now, the way we started that was on a layer two for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's layer one is inherently quite limited. And so what we did is we built out all of these tools on layer two called Stacks. And what this allowed us to do is get experience with Bitcoin, build out a marketplace, and basically enable this digital asset layer on that L2 secured by Bitcoin. And what we've seen over the past couple months is a renewed set of technologies that enable non-fungible asset ownership directly on Bitcoin through what's called Ordinal Theory, which basically assigns a unique number to each Satoshi or each unit of Bitcoin. And that allows you to actually have non-fungible assets directly on the Bitcoin base layer. And since our goal has always been just to build the base layer for NFTs or digital assets on Bitcoin, we started to build as much as we could for ordinals from day one. Launching an inscription service where anyone can click and drag an image and launch their inscription in seconds, create their own digital assets on Bitcoin. And then just as of last week now, a marketplace, an open marketplace for ordinals where you can trade them with others, list them for sale, browse different collections and buy them as well.
Yeah, that's right. So on if you go to the Gamma marketplace or the website, which is just gamma.io, link in the show notes, of course, listeners. But now there's a stacks marketplace and there's an ordinals specific marketplace on Gamma, which is great to see. And I think, Jamil, it'd be good if it's obviously a little bit technical, but a lot of people probably, only people that are really deep into A, Bitcoin, or B, Bitcoin NFTs or ordinals, which is probably still a relatively niche community. I think it's fair to say, and only that niche community really understand what ordinals are or how they work, certainly how they are different from the way people understand NFTs as working on chains like Ethereum. So it's a little bit technical, but I think it'd be good to hear the story, or Jamil. So do you want to just give us the kind of the nutshell story or history of the Ordinal protocol, who Casey Rodamore is, what makes Bitcoin Ordinals possible, and again, I mean, you mentioned Ordinal Theory, but take us through it.
Yeah, for sure. So there are really two big things that allowed for ordinals to take off over the past few months. The first is something called Ordinal Theory. And this is a way of basically making your sats or your individual units of Bitcoin non-fungible. So the way you can sort of think of this is most people think of Bitcoin as similar to almost a debit card, where let's say you have $1,000 in your bank account and you pay for a coffee. And let's say that coffee costs $3 or whatever. You don't really think of that $3 as coming from a certain part of your bank balance. It just subtracts $3 from that $1,000 you have in your bank. It doesn't take it off the top or it doesn't take it off the bottom. It's just $1,000 minus $3. This actually isn't quite the way Bitcoin works. Bitcoin works more of like a IOU system or more of like a receipt tracking system, more like checks or more like dollar bills that you can actually track the history of. So if you pay for a coffee with cash, instead of, for example, taking your wallet and saying, just take any $3 out of my wallet, you actually choose which bills you take out. And Bitcoin works in much a similar way, where actually you have to choose, which transactions or which outputs you're using to pay for a certain transaction. And not only do you do that in a way where it's traceable. So it's almost as if you had dollar bills that you could trace back to their history at when they were minted or printed by the government. And what this allows you to do is basically go back and trace the history of your Bitcoin all the way to the block it was mined in. You can say, this is the BTC that's in my wallet. I can trace it back to them being mined at this point. And so this is really powerful. It enables you to basically look at the Bitcoin in your wallet and trace its origins and treat it as unique and not only just as a bank balance, like I mentioned before, like if you're using a debit card. The second part that's really interesting is what's called inscriptions. And this is a way of putting data directly on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so to extend the metaphor or overextend the metaphor a little bit, this is equivalent to almost like drawing on those dollar bills or drawing on that money, basically ascribing not only the uniqueness property to this currency, but also some additional information that exists beyond just the currency. And this is what you see has created this kind of explosion of of use cases. People are inscribing images, audio, even websites, text, a ton of different types of data on their Bitcoin. And that gives them more value too. You're basically ascribing information or imparting information on each of those individual units of Bitcoin as well. So ordinal theory is not something that's particularly new. The first examples of it being proposed are in Bitcoin talk forums that go back to like 2013, I think was the first instance of someone proposing a similar idea. But Casey really popularized it and wrote infrastructure to actually track and index the locations of all of these sats over time. And then also identified this basically almost loophole in a recent Bitcoin upgrade, which allowed you to put a lot more data in a single Bitcoin transaction. And so this allowed people to put images, more text, and a richer variety of content on the blockchain compared to what was possible before. I think what was possible before was like around 80 bytes in what's called the op return part of the Bitcoin transaction. So that's about 80 characters of data that you could put in, barely enough for a few words. Now you can put in up to 4 megabytes of data. So that's enough for an image or something a lot more tangible.
And that the update you're referring to there, Jamil, is the Taproot network upgrade. It's surprising to me that, how did you describe it? You said it was kind of like an unintended loophole in, I guess, the Taproot code that allowed for more data essentially on those individual Satoshis. It's absolutely crazy. And am I right? And I get this because it's still so early, Jamil, but there's a sense already. I guess there's two camps. There's the kind of the people that are really excited by, and I'll talk about when I say two camps, I mean two camps of Bitcoiners, right? So there's two camps of Bitcoiners. One camp is like, oh wow, this is cool. Bitcoin is becoming programmable in the way that we understand Ethereum to be programmable. And then of course the other camp is more like, well, no, this has the potential or ability to just clog up the Bitcoin blockchain unnecessarily. That's not what Bitcoin is for. Bitcoin should just be a hard, robust currency, store of value, digital gold. It's not about attaching your dick pics to the blockchain. What do you get this? Am I kind of misrepresenting those two camps, or is that fair to say?
No, there's certainly a contingent of Bitcoiners that believe that it's a waste of block space, and I do see some of their arguments, but I think it's difficult to a priori come in and say this is exactly what a blockchain should be used for and try and prevent any other use, regardless of how it manifests. And that's simply because Bitcoin is a censorship-resistant, open, permissionless protocol. No matter what, you'll find a way to encode some data in one way or another. And in fact, there's a lot of precedent for data being stored on the blockchain as well. From the Genesis block, which had the famous Times headline, Chancellor on the brink of bailout, a second bailout for banks, you have a rich history of Bitcoin being used not only for payments, but to preserve culturally important information. I think the first time the Bitcoin white paper was included on chain in Bitcoin was about a decade ago. So you do have this history, this rich history of Bitcoin, not only being used as a payment mechanism, but using those same properties of censorship resistance, of basically like permanent storage to be used for things other than payments. And I think, using Bitcoin, assuming Bitcoin is the payment rails for the future, which I strongly believe it will be, you have a great place to put small bits of information that you believe are going to be culturally relevant or important to preserve. You're basically putting that information on the backbone of how the future economy will operate. And I think that's an incredibly powerful concept. We saw it when we launched our inscription service too. Like, we saw the difference in what people were doing on Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus Stacks. As soon as we launched it, people were not only just inscribing, random images or things that they wanted to sell. they were putting family photos, they were putting books they read as a kid, they were inscribing a ton of things that they just really felt that, hey, I want to preserve this on Bitcoin. Only Bitcoin can give me these guarantees compared to other blockchains.
Yeah, thank you, Jamel. And I think, I'm still trying to kind of get my head around this myself. I'm very early, just learning more about ordinals, but I do get the sense that, yeah, as you're alluding to, there is already a little bit of a difference between people that are, deep into ordinals, as opposed to, the different NFT ecosystems on the other chains. So, but perhaps you can speak to that. And I guess, you said it yourself. Then I think there's already a difference between the kind of true finality of being able to put an ordinal on the Bitcoin blockchain versus some of the other ecosystems where the NFTs essentially link to the IPFS, and there's good reasons for that because they want to update the metadata and change the NFTs and all that stuff. But you can make the argument that that is not a true decentralized, censorship resistant NFT or ordinal in the same way that something on Bitcoin is, right?
Yeah, exactly. On platforms like Ethereum and Solana, normally people don't put their data directly on chain. They link to it through a platform like IPFS. And it's potentially the case that people will start doing this on Bitcoin as well as block space demand increases and as fees go higher. But I think what's interesting is that you saw from the start, the default on Bitcoin was to preserve the data directly on chain. And I think that's an interesting departure from the way that NFTs have been developed in the past. Casey likes to call them digital artifacts instead of NFTs as well, to emphasize that these are not just tokens, right? These are not just non-fungible tokens. These are something else. These are something that are more long-lasting, more preserved, I guess, than the ephemeral nature of keeping some data off chain.
And talk us through the process then in terms of the maybe like buying an ordinal, inscribing an ordinal yourself. As I can see, you've got some tools available on Gamma that make this process reasonably simple. But as I understand it, if you were to do this yourself, I guess natively on a Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, you'd have to run a node, and it's quite a technical process, Jamel.
Yeah, right now it is. If you want to do it all manually, it is quite a technical process. You have to set up a Bitcoin node, set up a tool called Ord, and it requires some technical background to do so. That being said, I would encourage everyone to go through the experience of running a Bitcoin node because it's not as intimidating as it sounds.
Yes.
And honestly, it is worth it to contribute to the security of the network.
Yes.
So if you're into Bitcoin and if you're into crypto, I would highly recommend running a Bitcoin node. It's much easier than an Ethereum node, I think, to set up. And it's just magical to see it running for the first time, interacting with other nodes, and basically realizing that dream of like a permissionless, freely available network that's completely peer-to-peer, not relying on any central authority. Your nodes just talking to other nodes and getting the state of the network. But anyway, I digress. That's a requirement to do like a basic inscription. That being said, a lot of services have come up, including Gammas, to make that process a little easier. If, for example, you don't have time to set up a node right now, or you ran into some roadblocks. So what we do is on the website, if you go to gamma.io and you click on ordinals, we have a service where you can basically click and drag images and inscribe them yourself. All you have to do is pay the miner fee, and we'll inscribe it for you, basically, and send it to the address that you want. You do need a Bitcoin-enabled wallet to do this. So some examples are Hero, Xverse, Unisat is another new one. But once you have that set up, it should take like 30 seconds to get your first inscription done. And if it's a text inscription, might only cost something like $5 or less to get started. So would highly encourage anyone who wants to play around with ordinals to check it out because it's really easy to get started with services like Gamma.
Yeah, cool. So I'm just looking at Gamma at the moment, and yeah, it's interesting to see the I guess the early ordinals collections. I mean, they look reasonably similar, some of them to some of the stacks collections as well. Maybe there's just similar people involved, which would make sense being in, the kind of the more Bitcoin orientated communities. Look, early days, Jamel, but just can you give us a sense of, is there any kind of unique vibes or styles or anything like that happening in terms of the ordinals collections that are available on the first marketplaces such as Gamma?
I think early on you're going to see a trend of people basically copying what worked on ETH or Stacks or other chains.
Yep.
And I kind of make the metaphor of like skeuomorphism, which is this idea that in software, for example, you borrow ideas from physical patterns, right? Like when the first iPhone came out, the buttons looked like physical buttons. Or even when the first cars came out, they had a lot of manual like levers and very tactile things. And I think you're sort of seeing the same thing as people come to Bitcoin. It's not going to be an immediate cultural shift. You're going to find people that figure out, what worked on Ethereum, what worked on Solana, what worked on Stacks, and bring that over to Bitcoin. But I think you've already started to see a little bit more culture adapt and a little bit of divergence between what's worked on other chains and what's worked on Bitcoin. For example, Yuga Labs, who did the Bored Ape Yacht Club, Mutant Ape Yacht Club, the Sewer Pass, and stuff like that, they when they came to Bitcoin, they didn't choose to bring a profile picture collection to Bitcoin. They chose to bring a more fine art, refined collection, small, like 300 size collection to Bitcoin. And you saw something similar with DeGods or Sappy Seals. When they came to Bitcoin, they chose to do something that was much more niche, much more refined, and quite different from the projects that they had done on ETH and Solana. And I don't think many people have quite internalized that yet. So you're seeing a lot of people bring in some of the same stuff. But going back to the point about people, inscribing their family heirlooms or their books or their cultural artifacts, I think you'll start to see more and more of this become part of the culture of the way that a lot of these assets evolve. That there's something special about putting your data on Bitcoin, and it's not just going to be treated like any other chain or any other profile picture collection. And I'm really excited about that. I think cultures that evolve separately or cultures that evolve independently, leaning into their own values and their own history, tend to come out better than just copying whatever has happened before. I think it's why, for example, there has been no, next Silicon Valley in the US, because the next of anything is not anything, right? You have to come out as your own value with your own value propositions and what makes yourself unique. And I think Bitcoin is best positioned to do that. Bitcoin is not the next ETH. Bitcoin NFTs or Bitcoin digital assets are not the next ETH NFTs. They are their own digital artifacts and their own culture that will emerge, independent and with their unique value proposition.
Yeah, no, I like the sound of that, and that makes sense to me intuitively. I think, Jamal, because the same way that we all kind of see Bitcoin as, or certainly within crypto, it's the slightly slower, safer, more conservative side of crypto, but that's a good thing because you can rely on Bitcoin to keep doing its thing in a way that is not necessarily true with other chains. So, use the example of Solana. It's going to cost you next to nothing to just mint some throwaway NFTs to experiment with stuff. That's great. Move fast and break things. Have fun. But as you say, if you're wanting to preserve something that actually has meaningful value to you or your family, and you want to inscribe it as a Bitcoin ordinal, then, well, guess what? You're going to have to spend a little bit of Bitcoin. And I love the way that Gamma, you have the 3 or 4 different fee options as to how fast you want to inscribe it, I guess. I hope I'm using the right terms here, Jamel. But yeah, it does feel a little bit more permanent, because you really, for people to do that, they have to spend some of their hard-won BTC, which is, you really got to want to do it, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes to another point as well. I've been asked by a lot of people, um, do you think that Bitcoin's relative, rigidity is a downside when it comes to these things? And how do you deal with the fact that the protocol probably won't ever change in a meaningful way? And I think the past few months have shown that this can be an enormous benefit as well.
Yes,
Like
yes.
ordinals didn't require any change to the core protocol to make happen. That was something that was built on top as a protocol standard on top of Bitcoin, using the existing functionality of Bitcoin. And I think this is an incredibly strong concept as well. The fact that you can do so much with a very rigid protocol. I kind of liken it to, and apologies if I use this metaphor on the previous podcast as well, but almost like the way the American Constitution works, right? The US is one of the most innovative countries in the world, yet has one of the most rigid and hard to change constitutions that hasn't really been changed in a meaningful way in centuries, right? And yet you still have so much innovation and so much creativity happen on top of that basically immutable or very difficult to change base layer. And I think you see the same thing on Bitcoin. Just because you have an immutable base layer, just because you have a strong base layer, doesn't mean you can't have innovation on top. And in fact, sometimes a stronger base layer can actually encourage more creativity and more innovation, since you're guaranteed that the principles that underlie everything are strong and rigid, that you won't have, the law changed from underneath you, that you won't have, chaos reign if something goes wrong. You're basically guaranteeing the legal system, the judicial system, the system of checks and balances. And I think that metaphor applies to Bitcoin very well. Everybody that's a miner, everybody that's inscribing data on Bitcoin knows what the common rules of the protocol are and can feel confident that those common rules won't change from underneath them. So when you pay that much for an inscription, when you pay $100 to put your image on Bitcoin, you know that the rules won't change from underneath you, that you're really paying for something that is immutable, that is going to last for a very long time without substantial changes.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that, Jamel, and I think that is a good metaphor, very relevant, and you're exactly right. We want Bitcoin to stay Bitcoin. We don't want it to change. I guess in much the same way as you say is the founding principles of the Constitution. But it's funny to contrast that against the narratives in crypto. Narratives and crypto can be so strong, and they come from nowhere and really capture the market's imagination. They can be incredibly powerful, but they can come and go, really quickly. Like, the metaverse narrative sort of came with a lot of noise, and look, it's still there bubbling away in the background. But AI has kind of captured the world's imagination at the moment. I guess it's similar with NFTs and general, Jamel. We had that incredible first bull market of 2021 when, again, NFTs, the narrative did indeed capture the world's imagination. 2 years later, it is a little bit different. Effectively, you run an NFT marketplace. So I'd be curious, Jamel, and just, if you kind of take it a bit wider from just the ordinals, but kind of, I guess, NFT culture in general. What do you see happening? Where do you see it going? Just kind of curious as to what you think is happening.
Yeah, I find narratives quite funny. They're almost like memes, right? They go viral, and then a year later, you're like, well, I don't remember what was going on then, or why anybody found that interesting.
Yeah.
We've seen this several times over market cycles. I mean, I got into ML not super early. Like as I mentioned, my background is in AI. I got into it around 2014. That was when it started going mainstream, but there was still not very much attention on it. Attention was on things like distributed systems and other fields. And so it's been interesting to see that in AI as well, how the narrative cycles can change. I don't really focus on that. I think the narrative cycles are useful for capitalizing on momentum, for getting users, for raising money, for, basically timing the market, I guess. But they're not very useful for figuring out what actually adds value in the long term. I think for those things, you really have to distill it down to your gut, your instinct, what you know, and kind of ignore the crowd. The crowd is useful for figuring out how to capitalize on the momentum, how to market it well, but it's not useful to me to figure out, what I find is important or what I think is going to add value to the world. For example, like with Bitcoin NFTs or Bitcoin digital assets, I think there's a hype cycle right now around them, right? There's no doubt about it. Like the narrative is on our side right now. That wasn't the case over the past 18 months. We spent the past 18 months trying to raise money from VCs or talk to others, and they said nobody wants to put their JPEGs on Bitcoin. People only see Bitcoin as a store of value. Nobody wants to use it as NFTs or that Bitcoiners simply don't want to do that. That was the prevailing narrative at the time. And now it's completely the opposite. And so you can sort of see the fickleness of the way that these narratives evolve and how quickly they can change without nothing has changed about Bitcoin. Nothing fundamental has changed about NFTs. The same premises and the same foundations exist today as they did when we were talking to those people last year. So I think the real key for these things is to figure out what are the principles and what are the fundamentals that you really believe in. And for us, I think it's always been the fact that Bitcoin is the most secure, most decentralized, longest lasting blockchain, has the highest chance of success in the long term. And there's simply no better place to enable decentralized ownership of assets versus Bitcoin. And this is a much more profound idea than just talking about collections or speculation on NFTs. It's actually saying that this will be the way that assets that you own something. And I think I mentioned this on the previous podcast as well with you, which is that it's the first time in history that you have this idea of ownership that goes beyond a central authority, aside from basically the physical world, where if I own something because the atoms in the universe say it is that way. There's no central authority that decides it unless you talk about the world or the state of the atoms as a central authority. And the same thing is true with Bitcoin. All nodes agree on what you own, whether it's an inscription or your BTC or whatever. And so you can talk about speculation, about collections, about apes or punks or whatever, but I think these are just first examples of a whole economy basically that can be run on a decentralized, permissionless, open protocol without having to trust a government or a company or anybody else to tell you what you own and what you don't.
Getting chills, Jamil, listening to you talk there. It's so good to just, talk to Bitcoiners and hear Bitcoiners talk about Bitcoin. And it's what I've noticed in recent podcasts, Jamil, because I speak to a lot of different people. I have a lot of different guests. And to be honest, most of them aren't necessarily what you'd call Bitcoiners. They're coming from DeFi or other chains. They're running all sorts of different ecosystems. But increasingly, a lot of them, because everyone comes into Bitcoin first when they come into crypto, and a lot of those people, they're kind of talking about Bitcoin again as their kind of their one true crypto passion, or they recognize that Bitcoin is still really the only truly censorship resistant decentralized cryptocurrency. And I think part of that is because of what is happening perhaps in the world at the moment. We don't need to go too deep into it, but perhaps there's just hints of some financial shenanigans around the world. And again, or perhaps it's just again a narrative shift, Jamil, in that we're perhaps coming out, just beginning to come out the other side of the bear market, and the price goes up a bit and people begin to take notice of Bitcoin. But it just feels like yeah, Bitcoin is having its moment in the sun again. Maybe even it's just the regulatory pressure coming to bear on other chains and other tokens. But I don't know, whatever it is, I do you agree that Bitcoin seems to be catching some favor again?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the important things to note is that, for people in like, I guess my or your crypto generation, we got our first exposure through Bitcoin. But a lot of the newcomers to the space, they got really excited about NFTs, about DeFi, and for a period there, their first exposure was through maybe the ICO bubble or the NFT boom, and they had a vastly different experience than Bitcoiners. And I think with this movement through inscriptions and through digital artifacts, you're seeing almost a return where people can have their first experience in crypto through Bitcoin again, and have a positive experience. It's not about chasing a pump or chasing profits as quickly as possible. It's about bringing us together in the way that we got into Bitcoin in the first place, through the principles of decentralization, through the values that we had, and you can make money along the way if you believe, like I do, that Bitcoin will be the asset layer for the future. And I think many people have had that experience in the past, but then got disillusioned by Bitcoin as fewer and fewer fun things happened on it. I was one of the top project creators on Solana, a very well known project over there. He DM'd me in February, I think, and he was like, low key, I'm a Bitcoin maxi, or I'm actually a big Bitcoin person, but I never felt really comfortable coming back to Bitcoin. And this is the first time that I've felt like I'm excited about it again. And I think that's really exciting to get people excited about Bitcoin again, to be able to grow in a responsible way in line with the values that we have as Bitcoiners. And I think this is the opportunity to show the crypto world how it's done, right? How you can build things in a sustainable, decentralized way. How you don't always have to worry about like complicated DeFi schemes or protocols or whatever. You really just have to focus on the fundamentals and build in line with your values.
I love it. Just as we start to finish off, Jamel, I'm curious. You've said that you've spent time in the worlds of AI and machine learning, Apple as well. I'm sure you've been playing around with all the different AI tools that have suddenly become available over the last 6 months or so. Yeah, that feels like we're really living in interesting times, to coin a cliche there. But not only have we been alive to witness the birth of a new form of digital money into the world, but now we seem to be witnessing the birth of a new kind of artificial intelligence into the world. And I'm not sure people really understand what could happen in the years ahead. Jamel, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I feel like in a wave of a lot of people in tech being quite pessimistic and quite jaded, I feel like this is just the most exciting time to be alive. The amount of progress that we've seen in the past decade or two, actually the past few years, has been absolutely incredible. I remember when I did my first natural language processing course in my undergrad, the way that you would do like machine translation or come up with a language model was so primitive compared to what you have now. And that was not that long ago. That was like less than 10 years ago, where I was writing MATLAB code and, basically coming up with matrices of word counts and stuff like that, all setting the groundwork for what we've seen with the large language models today. So I think it's been incredibly fascinating to see the development of large language models. How they'll develop, I think already you've seen a tremendous impact in the way that productivity and the way that you do your work. I rely on some of these models now for my day-to-day work, and I feel like they've made me vastly more productive. And I think those are going to be the changes that you'll see in the next few years. just an incredible transformation in the way we work. And I feel like as engineers, you're kind of to some extent used to these almost paradigm shifts every few years. You talk to people that worked in the field of ML from 20 years ago, and they're broadly in two camps. The ones that kind of refuse to acknowledge what happens in the future and are stuck with the way things were in the 80s, 90s, or 2000s, and those that simply adapt to the progress that's been made. And I think it's not a good idea to ever fight progress or fight recent technology and development. That's sort of how you get the anti-crypto crowd, the people that sort of refuse to see the benefits of emerging technologies. And I think AI is a great example. I think there's a lot of like kind of reflexive pushback against anything that seems quite scary or different. But I'm incredibly optimistic about the future. And if you haven't tried, Chat GPT, Codex, a lot of these models, I would highly recommend doing so. It's magical. Like I remember dealing with language models just maybe 3 years ago, training language models based on what was at the time like LSTM, RNN architectures, and the progress that you've seen in just a few years has been enormous with these transformer-based LLMs. So yeah, hopefully that's a reasonable analysis.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jamil. Very, very much agree. It's just, yeah, it's just as you say, an exciting time to be alive. And man, who knows what will be happening a few years down the line as these models just help people accelerate their work in all sorts of different fields, and as they all kind of intersect and play off each other. And man, stuff is going to happen. I think we're kind of, let's start to wind it up, Jamil, and let's do that by, bring it back to what you guys are working on at Gamma. We haven't even really talked about stacks today, but, I guess just what are you guys seeing at Gamma? What are you working on? Anything that's coming down the pipeline? Yeah, keep us in the
Yeah,
loop.
so we're really focused on two main things right now. One is making better creator tools. So we launched the ability for creators to create collection mints, for example, where you can, as a creator, you can drag and drop images of your art, your work, and allow your collectors to pay for the inscription. You get the benefits, you get the proceeds from the mint. So it'll enable people to basically start creating inscriptions and ordinals in a way that they're used to, like on ETH or on other chains, in a much easier way, and reap the benefits of it as well as they get paid for their work. The other thing that we're focused on, aside from creator tools, is the secondary marketplace. That's live right now at gamma.io as well, where you can browse ordinals collections, see what other people are working on, see what other people are minting. We're going to be rolling out a lot more soon, like Discord bot verification. We're going to add native support for collections on chain. We're going to allow for more discoverability of ordinals collections, better browsing experience, better indexing of content so you can see, dynamic collections and things like that. Perhaps even, tracking purchases and listings from other marketplaces as well, so you can aggregate them all in one place. Offers and auctions. There's a whole list of things that we need to get done for the marketplace, but a lot of exciting things coming down the pipeline. I think we're just basically focused on building the best tools that we can for Bitcoin digital assets and trying to make them accessible to the broadest group of people.
Fantastic. Really enjoyed talking to you today, Jamil. Good to have you back on the show, get the update on Gamma, and start to learn about Bitcoin Ordinals. What can I say? All the best, and bye for now. And I'm sure we'll do this again in the future.
Thanks so much, Andy. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, there you go. That was Jamil from Gamma. Yeah. As I say, great to catch up with Jamil and Ordinals. Ordinal Theory, man. Still getting my head around Ordinal Theory. This blows my mind. So, each Bitcoin, right? So 21 million Bitcoin, each Bitcoin can be broken into 100 million units, Satoshis, right? So that's a Satoshi. Each Satoshi has its own number or serial number starting from 0. So these numbers are ordinal numbers, or they're mathematically they are ordinal numbers because they have an order to each Satoshi in the total supply. And each of those individual Satoshis can be inscribed with content, whatever you want, a picture, a video, a GIF, some words, creating those ordinals or Bitcoin NFTs. And Satoshi did the first one really with that, times on the brink of Chancellor on the brink of bailing out the banks, whatever that headline was, in the very first Bitcoin block. Yeah, I think I've got my history right there. Yeah, ordinals. Absolutely fascinating. Should give a shout out at the end of the show to my man Eli Herf. Thanks for helping set up this particular podcast. I hope you're doing good, man. Let's catch up soon. But we reach the end of another show. So what can I say? Thank you for listening, or thank you for watching. Please do remember to subscribe to the Crypto Conversation in whatever podcast app you are using. But that is the end of the show. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave and New Coin. See ya.